I placed my hand over my stomach the moment I heard his voice through the wall, and everything I thought I knew about my marriage dissolved in about 30 seconds. I was 32 years old, 7 months pregnant, and standing in the hallway of our house in Oakville. The one my husband, Cody, had insisted we buy because of the good school district, because he said he was thinking ahead, because he said he wanted our daughter to grow up somewhere safe. I had believed every word. I had believed all of it. Let me back up, because this story doesn't make any sense unless you understand who I was before it happened. My name is Nadia. I grew up in Hamilton, the younger of 2 daughters, raised by a mother who worked double shifts at a hospital laundry, and a father who left when I was 9 and didn't look back. My mother never talked about him with bitterness, she just talked about him rarely, the way you learn not to prod a bruise. What she did instead was push us. Get your education, she said. Don't let anyone hold the door of your life. I listened. I got a degree in forensic accounting from McMaster, started working for a mid-size firm in Toronto, and by the time I was 28 I was pulling in 6 figures, doing financial fraud investigations for insurance companies and small businesses that suspected their own employees of skimming. I was good at finding what people tried to hide, I just didn't think I'd ever need to use that skill on my own husband. I met Cody at a work event, one of those awkward rooftop gatherings where everyone holds a drink they don't really want. He was funny in a quiet way, the kind of person who makes one good joke and then lets it land instead of rushing to fill the silence. He worked in commercial real estate. He had a close relationship with his parents and his older brother. He remembered things I told him, small things, like that I hate the smell of certain hand soaps, or that I always read the last page of a novel first. He remembered and he incorporated them, and I thought that was love. We got married in the fall, 2 years after we met. Small ceremony at a winery in Niagara-on-the-Lake, 40 people, my mother crying in the front row. His parents, Rex and Charlene, were warm and present and seemed genuinely happy to welcome me into the family. His older brother, who I'll call my brother-in-law, and his wife, who I'll call my sister-in-law, were there too, smiling in photos, toasting at dinner. I thought I had married into something solid. The first year was good. The second year had small things I filed away and didn't examine too closely. My brother-in-law and my sister-in-law had been trying to have a child for a long time. It came up often, at family dinners, in side conversations, in the careful way my mother-in-law would avoid the subject entirely when they were in the room. My sister-in-law had gone through 2 rounds of IVF. Nothing had worked. By the time I got pregnant, they had quietly stopped talking about it altogether, which in some ways felt heavier than when they spoke. The pregnancy wasn't planned, but it was wanted. Cody cried when I showed him the test. Real tears, the kind you can't manufacture. Or so I thought. We told his parents first. There was champagne. His father, Rex, who was a man of very few words and a great deal of money, squeezed my hand at the dining table and said, "Well, it's about time this family had some good news." I didn't think much about that comment then. I would think about it constantly later. Rex had made his money in commercial construction over 40 years, and he was not a gentleman with finances. He had 2 sons, and he had always made clear in his way that the family business and the family money would pass to whoever was ready to carry it. My brother-in-law had worked in the business for over a decade. Cody had gone a different direction. The question of the inheritance had never been spoken out loud at family dinners, but I had spent enough time in rooms where money matters were present to feel the current of it. My pregnancy was uncomplicated, and then, at the 20-week scan, it became considerably more complicated in the best possible way. Twins. 2 boys. The technician turned the screen toward me and I saw 2 separate flickers of heartbeat, and I laughed out loud in a way that embarrassed me a little. Cody grabbed my hand. His parents were over that same evening with food and a bottle of wine for themselves and sparkling juice for me, and Rex sat at our kitchen island and said, 2 grandsons, with the look of a man checking something off a list. I didn't understand what that meant. Not yet. The pregnancy became the center of everything. My firm let me work from home through the 3rd trimester. I set up a dedicated space in the spare room with a proper monitor and a standing desk, and I kept taking cases because the work grounded me. It gave me something to focus on that was entirely mine, numbers and patterns and paper trails. I was good at being still when I needed to be, and I was good at noticing things that didn't line up. I noticed Cody on his phone more than usual. I noticed that he sometimes left a room when certain calls came in. I told myself it was work stress. Real estate had been rough across the GTA. Rates, inventory, the whole mess. I told myself I was projecting. I told myself I was 7 months pregnant, and my threat detection was running hot, and I needed to be careful about turning small things into large ones. I was careful, right up until I wasn't. It was a Thursday evening in late November. Cody had said he was on a call with a client, and he went into his home office and closed the door, which he did sometimes, so I didn't follow. I went to get a glass of water from the kitchen, which is at the end of the hall. The office door was not as closed as he thought it was. The hallway carries sound in a particular way. I'd noticed it before, a quirk of the house's layout. I heard his voice clearly. He wasn't talking to a client. He was talking about me. He was talking about the boys. He was talking about what would happen when they arrived. And the way he was talking, careful, low, structured, like a person reviewing the steps of something already decided, made my hand go still on the kitchen counter. I did not move for a long time. What I understood standing there in my socks on the hardwood floor with my hands on my stomach was this: my husband had made an arrangement with his brother. One of our sons, one of our boys, was meant to be transferred, given, passed across, not adopted, not surrendered through any legal channel I had ever encountered. Simply taken at birth in the chaos of delivery and attributed to my sister-in-law as her own. Because my sister-in-law's IVF had failed, and because Rex had told both his sons at some point that the inheritance, the real money, the business shares, the trust he'd structured with his estate lawyer, would pass to the son who produced a biological grandchild first. I am a forensic accountant. I spent the first 10 minutes of that revelation feeling absolutely nothing, the way you sometimes go completely numb before the pain arrives. Then I walked back to our bedroom, lay down on my side, and spent the next 4 hours thinking through every decision I would make from that point forward. I want to be honest about why I didn't pick up the phone immediately and call my mother, or my closest friend in Brampton who had been my best friend since first-year university, because I thought about it. I thought about calling every person I trusted, and then I thought about what I actually had. I had overheard a conversation through a door. I had no recording. I had no texts, no emails, no documents, and I was 7 months pregnant with twins in a house I co-owned with a man who had access to our joint finances, who had a family with resources and an estate lawyer they already consulted regularly, and who, if I moved too fast, would have time to cover everything before I had a single piece of paper to show anyone. I am good at what I do precisely because I know that evidence matters more than testimony. A person can say anything. A paper trail cannot be argued away. I gave myself 3 days of pretending. I kissed my husband at breakfast. I went to prenatal appointments. I laughed at the right moments, and I was careful not to be so cheerful that it registered as strange. And I started looking. Cody wasn't careful with his personal laptop when he thought I was asleep. The password was one he'd used on a streaming account he'd set up on my phone 2 years ago. I had never deleted it. I found a folder of emails between him and his brother going back 14 months. I found financial records, a payment made to a private physician operating out of a clinic in Mississauga that had no visible web presence, no reviews on any platform, and a registered address that came back to a numbered company when I ran it. I found text threads backed up from his old phone describing the logistics in plain language that made my stomach drop. I also found the document. It was a draft, not signed but detailed, laying out a private agreement by which one infant, to be determined by sex and health at birth, would be transferred to my brother-in-law and his wife within 48 hours of delivery. There was a clause about the money. The document described a payment from Rex's estate account that would flow to Cody upon confirmation of the arrangement. The amount was significant. I copied everything. I emailed it from a personal account my husband didn't know existed to a secure server I'd set up years ago for client documents. I printed nothing, because printers have logs. I kept going to sleep at the normal time and waking up at the normal time, and I did not change a single visible thing about how I moved through our house. On the 4th day, I called my best friend and asked if I could come over. I did not tell her why on the phone. When I got to her house in Brampton, I sat down at her kitchen table and I told her everything, and to her credit, she let me finish before she said a word. When I was done, she said, "You need a lawyer today." I said, "I need the right lawyer." She pulled out her laptop. Her cousin had done family law in Mississauga for 15 years, and she called him before I left the table. He saw me the next morning. He listened to everything, reviewed the copies of what I'd found, and was quiet for a moment at the end before he told me that what I had described, if it could be proven, constituted fraud, potential child abduction, and potentially criminal conspiracy. He told me that, given the planned use of a private physician outside any registered hospital delivery, there were reporting requirements that could bring other authorities in. He told me to be patient and to be careful. He also told me not to go back to that house if I didn't feel safe. I went back. Because I needed to keep gathering, and because leaving suddenly would have tipped everything. I know how investigations work. I know that the best outcome comes from holding still until you're ready to move, not from moving the moment you feel the ground shift. Over the next 3 weeks, I filled in gaps. The Mississauga clinic, I traced the numbered company back to a man with a disciplinary record with the College of Physicians and Surgeons of Ontario. He had a previous complaint involving falsified records. I sent everything to my lawyer, and he, in consultation with the evidence, made contact with the RCMP Financial Crimes Unit because the estate funds recs had structured to flow through this arrangement constituted fraud by the beneficiary under the estate documents. I need to pause here because I want to say something about my mother-in-law, Charlene. Because I looked and I could not find a single indication that she knew. Her emails showed nothing. Her phone records, which I couldn't access directly, but could see the pattern of through our shared family plan, showed no communication with the clinic, with the unnamed physician, with anyone connected to the arrangement. She had been talking for months about the nursery she wanted to help me set up, about knitting projects she'd started for the boys, about a wooden rocking horse her own mother had given her that she wanted to pass along. I believe Charlene did not know. That matters to me. The birth was scheduled for late January via planned C-section at a hospital in Burlington, a proper hospital, a registered one my OB had booked months in advance. I had already told my lawyer which hospital. I had already told the RCMP liaison officer which hospital and which date. I had already spoken with patient services at the hospital and flagged, formally and in writing, my concerns about unauthorized access to my children post-delivery, citing my situation and the documentation I had provided to law enforcement. Cody did not know any of this. He came to every prenatal appointment in those final weeks. He assembled both cribs. He made a playlist for the delivery room that included a lot of early 2000s tragically hip, which I had told him once I loved, and in that moment I felt the grief of it, the grief of what he had been, or what I thought he had been, alongside the reality of what he actually was. Both things were real, and they were terrible together. The morning of the delivery, his brother and my sister-in-law were in the hospital waiting room. I had been told they would be. Cody had mentioned it, casually, a week earlier. Just the family coming to be supportive, he said. I smiled and said, of course. The nurse who brought me to the prep area was someone I had spoken with before. Her supervisor knew my file. There were 2 plainclothes officers in the hospital that morning, positioned in places I'd been told about in advance. The C-section was fast, and it was loud, and then it was quiet, and then both my sons were crying at the same time, and that sound, the 2 of them, simultaneous, furious at the world, was the most extraordinary thing I have ever heard. I held them both. What happened in the waiting room took approximately 40 minutes. From what I was told later, my brother-in-law had made contact with the physician, who had arrived at the hospital presenting himself in a way designed to appear affiliated with the delivery team. The officers intercepted him before he made it past the maternity ward corridor. My brother-in-law, when he understood what was happening, attempted to leave the hospital. He did not get far. Cody was informed in my recovery room, with a nurse present, by the officer who came to speak with him. I did not watch his face, I was looking at my sons. The charges that followed were significant. The private physician had prior involvement in falsified records. This was not his first arrangement of this kind, and that fact became part of a larger investigation. My brother-in-law and Cody were both charged with conspiracy and fraud. Rex, when the estate documents were fully examined, was found to have structured the trust in ways that intersected with the arrangement. His estate lawyer resigned, and law enforcement was also looking at his files by the end of spring. My sister-in-law, I need to say something about her too, because people ask, when I tell this story, whether she was part of it. The investigation found that she had known, she had agreed. She had known she was not going through any pregnancy and had agreed to present a newborn as her own. She was charged as a co-conspirator. I don't carry hatred for her, because I think I understand, in some technical way, the desperation of someone who has wanted a child for years and been told it won't happen. But understanding something isn't the same as forgiving it, and she had agreed to take my son from me. She had sat at my kitchen table and eaten dinners I cooked and talked about baby names, so no. The understanding only goes so far. My best friend flew in from Brampton the week I came home from the hospital. She stayed for 2 weeks and helped me establish a routine with 2 infants in a house that I was in the process of having Cody removed from, which involved its own legal complexity and a court order and a very good family lawyer who moved quickly once the criminal charges were in place. My mother drove up from Hamilton every weekend for the first 3 months. She would arrive on Saturday mornings with food from a Jamaican restaurant she liked, and she would sit in the nursing chair in the boys' room and talk to them for an hour while I slept. The house in Oakville, I sold it. I did not want to stay in it. I found a place in Kitchener, a semi-detached that needed work, closer to my mother and in a neighborhood I liked. I repainted the boys' room myself with help from my best friend over a weekend when the boys were with my mother. We used a color called Quiet Morning and it took 3 coats, and we talked the entire time, and it was one of the better days I've had. The estate trust, once the fraud investigation ran its course and the arrangement was deemed to have been made under criminal intent, was restructured through the courts. Rex's legitimate assets went through probate as they would have anyway. He was not arrested, but the components of the trust tied to the fraudulent arrangement were voided. What this meant for me, practically, was that the financial damage Cody had attempted to position himself to receive was gone. What it also meant was that the payments he had already received, the early disbursements made to him in anticipation of the arrangement, were considered proceeds of fraud and subject to recovery. My civil lawyer filed accordingly. I'm not going to tell you that the years since have been easy. Single parenting 2 boys in your early 30s with a criminal case moving through the courts, and a house to maintain, and a career to keep functional is not easy. It is frequently exhausting and occasionally lonely, and there are nights when I put the boys to bed and sit at the kitchen table with a cup of tea and feel the weight of all of it at once. But here is what I want to leave you with, because I have thought about this a great deal. I am a forensic accountant. My job is to find what's hidden. I spent years doing it for other people. Finding the assistant who had been skimming from a family restaurant for 3 years. Finding the business partner who had been routing commissions through a shell account. Finding the patterns that ordinary eyes miss because they aren't looking in the right place with the right questions. And every single skill I used in those files I used in my own house, in my own hallway, in my own marriage. People ask me, when I tell this story, weren't you scared? And the honest answer is that I was scared every single day of those final 3 months of my pregnancy. I was scared when I found the first email. I was scared when I copied the documents and deleted my search history and lay next to a man who was planning to take one of our children and pretended to be asleep. I was scared in that hospital room, but fear is not the same as paralysis. I have known that since I was 9 years old, watching my mother leave for a double shift in November wearing a coat she'd had for too many years, without a single word of bitterness. My boys are healthy. They are loud and particular, and they have their own ideas about most things already, even at their age. The older one by 4 minutes has my mother's eyes and an opinion about every meal put in front of him. The younger one is quieter and more watchful, and sometimes he looks at me in a way that makes me feel completely understood. I kept both of them. I kept all of it. The work, the house, the name I built, the family I grew up in. The only thing I let go of was the version of my life I thought I was living. It turns out I was building a different one the whole time, a better one. Mine.